Hi everyone, this is Ginger and you're watching Gnostic Psych, the channel where I share with you the arcane and interesting related to psychology. And if you like this video or any of my other videos, please click like and subscribe. And today I'm going to be talking about the first case study in the history of psychological literature that was actually published, James Tilly Matthews. James Tilly Matthews was actually a Welsh tea broker who was living in London. He had been a student of Enlightenment ideas as well as a businessman. So when the French Revolution broke out in 1789, he became concerned about the growing possibility of war between Great Britain and France. The British monarchy didn't want any ideas justifying the overthrow of their throne spread across the Channel, so the British government began funding and arming royalist opponents of the revolutionary government, heightening tensions between both countries. Matthews and his friend, Welsh philosopher David Williams, traveled to France in order to mediate between both countries. Matthews was able to gain the trust of a faction of revolutionaries who were moderate, called the Girondins, and was a regular presence among their ranks in the French Convention. However, in 1793, a radical faction of revolutionaries, the Jacobins, seized power. Matthews and his Girondist allies were imprisoned, and he was suspected of being a double agent by the new Jacobin regime. The Jacobins subsequently unleashed a wave of political terror in France, including the execution at the guillotine of aristocrats, Girondins, royalists, and any others suspected of being enemies of the state. For 3 years in a prison, the nonstop threat of the guillotine hung over Matthews' head and had a dominant presence in his psyche. By the time his case came before the authorities, Matthews' execution was actually waived from him being deemed a lunatic. He was released in 1796 after the Jacobin regime had been overthrown by a faction of revolutionaries called the Thermidorians. He returned to England after his release. Following his return to France, Matthews wrote 2 letters to the British Home Secretary, William Pitt the Younger, warning about conspiracies being plotted against him. Pitt understandably ignored his letters and never responded back. Subsequently, Matthews interrupted a debate in the House of Commons by yelling "traitor" at William Pitt from the public gallery. Matthews was committed to London's Bethlem Royal Hospital in early 1797. And Bethlem had actually inspired the term Bedlam, which is usually used to refer chaos and then craziness going on. Matthews told the doctors treating him that there were giant heirlooms being operated beneath the streets of London by teams of French spies. The rays being emitted from the looms were bombarding government officials and hypnotizing them into making decisions that benefited the French government. William Pitt the Younger had been one of their targets. Matthews reported that he himself had been bombarded by rays from one of the heirlooms, which were causing him sensations of physical pain. He was able to identify the spies who operated the looms as Sir Archie, King Bill, Glove Woman, and the mediator who actually ran the machine. Matthews' paranoid persecutory delusions, about the heirlooms and French spies may sound incomprehensible to people of the 21st century. However, the heirlooms he talked about are what are referred to in the study of schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders as influencing machines. The term was first coined in 1919 by Austrian psychoanalyst Victor Tausk, a one-time student and protege of Freud's, who, like many of his proteges and students, was exiled from his circle. Tausk described the influencing machine as a common delusion held by persons with schizophrenia or related psychotic disorders. The machine is an alien device that is malignant and remote and can influence thoughts and behaviors. Further, the influencing machine is of a mystical nature that is described in technical terms, but elusive with respect to persecutory effects, such as images, thoughts, feelings, motor phenomena, sensations, and bodily manifestations. In these times, microchips, computers, televisions, electromagnetic frequencies, cell phones, cameras, and other communicated devices are typically reported by persons with schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders as playing a role in their paranoid persecutory delusions. We know that Matthews' paranoid persecutory delusions involve this narrative about the heirloom from a book that was actually written by his Bethlem physician, John Haslam. Haslam's 1810 book, called Illustrations of Madness, was based on Matthews' shared delusions and psychoses to Haslam. The book includes detailed drawings of the heirlooms made by Matthews, and one of these such drawings is actually the picture of this video. So how did the trauma from chronic fears by Matthews of being beheaded by the guillotine lead to his psychoses and delusions? Well, in the DSM-5, one of the criteria for PTSD is exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. One way of exposure is to witness in person the traumatic event or events as it occurred to others. Now, being locked in a prison where he was exposed to his fellow prisoners being guillotined on a regular basis and being powerless to escape for his own life led to psychological trauma and the development of a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. The psychology literature, it's been a long day, has many studies showing that there is a strong link between psychological traumas and psychotic disorders. Along with PTSD, psychotic disorders like schizophrenia and schizophreniform disorders are the most common psychopathologies afflicting people who have been subjected to traumatic life experiences related to severe traumas of a direct or indirect, chronic, or sudden nature. In 1809, Matthews' family petitioned to have him released from Bethlehem Hospital's custody. 2 physicians were appointed by the courts to make a determination whether he was mentally fit to be released. They both declared Matthews sane and therefore fit to be released. However, Dr. Haslam made a compelling case that he was not sane. The writing of the book, Illustrations of Madness, was actually a case study in order to show the authorities and the public that Matthews needed to be locked away from society. In 1814, Matthews was moved to Fox's London House, which was a private asylum run by a doctor of the same name, and the London borough of Hackney. His delusions were actually observed to have subsided afterwards. Dr. Fox himself observed that he had become less symptomatic and argued that he was sane. Matthews actually continued to assist Fox with bookkeeping and gardening until his death in 1815. Interestingly, though, while Matthews was at Bethlehem, he took meticulous notes on the inhumane treatments he had been subjected to by Dr. Haslam. Following Matthews' death, the discovery of Matthews' notes led to a commission held by the House of Commons to investigate the cruel and inhumane conditions in treatment of patients by the doctor and staff at asylums in England. The findings by the committee led to Dr. Haslam's dismissal and the push for reforming the conditions in treatment of prisoners in mental hospitals and asylums.